Hi everyone, my name is Amanda and I set out to create the internet's perfect watermelon soap. This is a cold process soap, and believe it or not, this is only my fourth batch of cold process soap that I've ever made. There's a lot that I still need to learn, and thank you to all of you in the soaping community who have taught me so much already. But the particular problem that I set out to solve had to do with making a more perfect watermelon soap. Specifically, there were three challenges that I wanted to tackle. One was to make the soap perfectly round. So you see a lot of square watermelon soaps. Some of them have kind of a half pipe carved out of them, so there's a round part in the design of the soap, but the actual shape is still square. So I wanted to have a round one. I wanted to see a rind, the two shades of green, be in a more accurate form, so kind of vertical stripes as opposed to just two shades of green layered on top however way. And then finally, the ever-present problem of the seeds. So I wanted to make perfectly raindrop shaped seeds and seeds that went all the way through the soap, so that there wasn't going to be that level of unpredictability when you cut through your soap. So I think we tackled those challenges. The soap was so complicated and crazy to make. It took me 6 months of thinking about it in my head to actually create the way that I was going to design it. So I unfortunately will not be showing you the actual process, but I do have some pictures that I think will help really easily illustrate what I did, so that if you want to recreate it, you could do so. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly what I did with all of my supplies and what I used to create the soap, so that you can do it on your own. So the essential structure of this soap is basically like a big birthday cake, and you create it with these cake rings. So here I have an 8-inch, a 7-inch, and a 6-inch cake ring. And when I was done, this created 10 wedges of soap that look like this. And when I get to the end, I'll explain how I cut it into those shapes. As every watermelon soaper knows, you have to create the seeds first. So the concept that I had for the seeds was to create them with straws. And I first started with just regular old plastic straws. And I realized that I couldn't get a very good teardrop shape with those straws, because when you bend them, they don't stay into place. So I ended up using these paper straws, which you can order from Amazon. And these paper straws have a structure where they're it's just paper wrapped around. So it also makes it really easy to get the seeds. Well, easy is probably an exaggeration, but easier, because you don't have to slice through like you would a plastic straw. You just slice a tiny bit of the end and then unwrap. So basically all I did was I squeeze the straw into the teardrop shape. So you're only squeezing one side of it, and I don't know if you can see, but it makes kind of a nice teardrop shape. I cut them in half, and here's the really cool trick that I figured out of doing. What I did was I took a paper plate and I melted some melt and pour soap onto the paper plate, and then I stuck my half straw into the melt and pour so it stood up. And then I was able to pour the melt and pour in, and some of it dripped down and it was really messy, but that was okay because it peeled off of the outside really easily, and then just made more places for me to put straws in the plate so they could stand up. So when I'm done, I have a watermelon seed like this that you can see. It has to be tall enough that it goes all the way through the cross section of your cake ring. And so you can cut off the top, and then when you slice it, it comes out perfectly. Even though the shape, you can see, is kind of a little curved, it's not perfect, but it doesn't matter, because once you cut the cross section, all you see is the tiny little teardrop shape that you see there. Once you're done making the seeds, the next part is making the green rind. This is by far the most difficult part of the soap. Once you're done with that, you're pretty much home free. We don't need the 6-inch ring for the rind. We just need the 8-inch and the 7-inch. So as you can see, since a cake ring is not like a regular mold in a few ways, it has no bottom and it has no way that you can get it out. So you have to construct both of those things. For my bottom, I simply put a bunch of parchment paper underneath, and I used some of this Glad press and seal, which I wrapped inside of the quote-unquote mold. So it's in this part of the mold and then this part, so it kind of comes up the sides in both areas so that you have a nice tight bottom for making the rind. And you can also put another piece under it if you want to be able to lift up your the whole mold like it's a regular mold. The other trick for making it an actual mold where you can remove the soap that is inside of it is you need to have this thing, which is a cake collar. And so it's round, it comes in a round shape, so it actually fits in really, really easily. This part is not difficult to do at all. You need to make sure that the cake collar is on the inside of the 8-inch and on the outside of the 7-inch, right? So there you can see that the soap can fully come out and be unmoldable when it's done. So then, here's the tricky part, by far the hardest part of making the rind. I knew that I needed to find a way to make these stripes go up and down, okay? Because this is not how watermelon soap goes. We don't want it like that. That would have been much easier to do, of course. So I thought about using popsicle sticks in a certain arrangement, but all of that just became too difficult because it's too, those are hard structures, and the shape of this is not perfectly round all the way around. So I needed something flexible. Something like a popsicle stick was not going to work. So I finally had the idea of using these boba straws. This is a 12 millimeter or 1/2 inch boba straw, and it turns out that this fits just perfectly. So you put these in, and when you put them all around, it so happens that you need 51 boba straws to go all the way around, and you're going to have 51 stripes all the way around. So you put the straws all the way around, and so that it's nice and tight. So they're falling over a little bit right now, as you can see, but once they're supported with all 51, they stay up perfectly, they don't fall over, and I cut off the tops so that the soap didn't have quite as far to travel. But the thing is, you don't want to cut down all the way, because if you do that, you won't have enough soap in your stripe. It has to be up about this high so that you can compensate for the fact that this is a round shape and it doesn't fully fill what the space of the stripe would be. So you need to have quite a bit of extra soap that goes higher than the mold to be able to fill the entire stripe when you're ready to go. These are the two colors that I used for the rind. This is Envy and Lettuce. Let Us Entertain You, both from Mad Mica. These colors worked perfectly. The original choices that I used, the green colors were too similar to one another, so this comes out much better, and these work perfectly for the rind. To put the soap in the straws, you use your typical ketchup and mustard bottles. They have nice skinny tops which fit into the boba straw just perfectly. You're of course going to need a very, very slow moving soap to do the rind. So this was another challenge of the soap because the rind and everything else are potentially different formulas and you're doing them on different days. But for certain, to get the stripes in all 51 straws, you need a very slow-moving soap. So your favorite slow-moving formula is what you definitely need for the rind. So this is what it looked like once I got the soap filled into all of the straws. So you did have to work kind of fast, and you can see that the soap is quite a bit higher than the mold, and it did turn out that it needed to be quite that high. This was admittedly an extremely messy part of the process. So because the soap needs to be so liquidy in order to work in this process, it does seep out through the bottom despite my best efforts. So all I did to fix that problem was I just kept refilling it. So having the ketchup and mustard bottles completely full did turn out to be enough soap to fill the 51 straws, as well as to compensate for it seeping out of the bottom. To get the soap out of the 1/2 inch boba straws, once they're in there, I did let the soap set up for about 45 minutes, and it was still plenty liquid enough to get the soap out. So then what you do is you get a 10 millimeter boba straw. So this one's 12, this one's 10. So it fits in, you can see it doesn't quite scrape all the way against the edges, but it does a good enough job once the soap has set up to get the soap out. You also have to do something to the bottom of your 10 millimeter straw so that you're not, just putting another straw inside. So I put melt and pour soap in the bottoms of my straw to kind of make a stopper, and that worked really well. So I just had a bunch of them available in case they got really sticky, which they did. And for every straw that I had to take out, I simply put the 10 millimeter straw inside, and I kept it towards about the top of the mold, which is where you want the soap to end up. And you almost just leave the 10 millimeter one where it is and lift up the 12 millimeter one from there so that you end up with your soap at the very top of the mold, which is where you want it. So if you recall, now what we have is we have the cake ring, and then we have a piece of cake collar on the inside. I was concerned about how difficult it might be to remove it, but it wasn't difficult at all because the soap is pretty oily and greasy, as you know. So as long as you leave the outside ring on, it was pretty easy. This came out pretty much from the cake collar itself with no problem, and then you simply peel away the cake collar, and then you'll see the green and white stripes, how they look on the inside of the soap, and that's a really cool part of the reveal. So then the next step is making the white part of the rind, which of course is very easy. You make a simple formula, whatever your favorite formula is. It doesn't need to be very slow moving. You use your titanium dioxide to get a nice shade of white, and then you insert your smallest mold on the inside. Okay, you're going to need another cake collar here so that you can remove it, and then you simply fill it with your white. So now you've got your soap with your green and white stripes on the outside, and then you have the white with the 7-inch mold removed. The final step, of course, is to be able to remove the inner mold, and now you only leave the outside mold. So you remove the mold, you peel off your cake collar. Now you've got the rind and the white, and you're simply filling the rest with your shade of pink that you choose. I chose as a base this Watermelon Punch mica from Nurture Soap. It looks really pale in the jar, and I thought it wasn't going to be dark enough, but it actually doesn't look anything like that when you use it. It does make a very nice watermelon shade. You could use it by itself if you wanted to. I knew that I wanted it to be a little bit pinker, so I also added some Hollywood Pink from Nurture Soap, and this is how the color finally came out. And so, as you would expect, you simply fill it with your watermelon pink, and then you stand up your watermelon seeds once it has set up enough. I measured the situation so that I knew I was going to have 5 soaps, and because it's so thick I could cut it in half, so I was going to end up with 10 wedges of soap. That's how I wanted it to do. So I calculated about 3 to 4 seeds per wedge. So I just kind of mathematically figured that out and then placed the seeds in there, and I let them stay with their tops above it, knowing that I was going to cut it later. Here's a picture of what the soap looks like once you get the pink and the seeds inside. And as you can see, I left everything in there, the collar, so that everything was kind of stayed nice and tight in there. And then once it was set up enough is when I could cut off the tops. Here's a picture of what it looked like the next day when I was finally able to remove that outer cake ring. So you can see those sort of perfect up and down yet imperfect stripes that look like they are in a real watermelon rind, and this looks like kind of a big weird goofy birthday cake. Then in order to get your wedges of soap, I calculated what that 5 pieces was going to be, and making sure that it fell outside of the seeds in the way I wanted it to. So that was the first cut that you had to make, and just use a regular handheld soap cutter for making those wedges. So you have a big huge wedge, and it's, that part of it was pretty challenging to do, but then you can turn it on its side and then cut it in your normal soap cutter. So if you can imagine that this was put back together, you have a big, huge wedge that's 1/5 of the circle. On one side you have the part that was touching your saran wrap. On the other side you have that birthday cake top that is very imperfect, that you're going to need to cut off quite a bit of it. The cake ring is so wide that it was absolutely not a problem, and it still gives you these perfectly decent sized soap bars. In fact, some people might say this is too big for a soap bar. So you cut off the bottom and the top so you have your perfect edges, and then you cut it in half just like you would a normal soap wedge. So the fact that it's round is not a problem once you get that big wedge into the soap cutter. So I wanted to mention that the fragrance oil is pink watermelon from Nature's Garden. It has, I think, almost no vanillin in it, so as you can see, it wasn't a problem for my white. It smells like watermelon Jolly Rancher, so it's not a natural watermelon smell, but it is a very fun, kind of delicious watermelon candy smell. And as you can see, this is what the final wedge of soap looks like. This is not fully cured. And one thing that kind of remains to be seen here is that given that the outside rind started out much softer, it's kind of getting pretty hard, and it seems like it's attached well to the other parts of the soap. But because you make this on different days, which is unusual for soap, it has to be seen whether these pieces will stay perfectly together. So once you start using it in the shower, for example, are you going to end up with separate pieces? Once it's fully cured, we might be able to see that it's solidly more together, but we can't quite tell that yet. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed hearing these instructions. Next time, when I'm a little bit more confident in my soap making process, I will make a video that shows me actually creating the soap, but I hope I've explained enough of the instructions so that you too can make the internet's perfect watermelon soap.